waited for you to lead us out of Babylon. For I was just a boy when I came here. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my gracious promise and bring you back to this land.
Who are you, old man?
I am Daniel. I seek to tell you a story. A tale of 4 kings. One great, one foolish, one who was deceived, and one who is destined to be regarded as wise for all the ages of the world to come. During those many years, we were living in a foreign land, speaking a foreign language, and living under a foreign king.
My king. I've heard of this man.
The Book of Daniel reveals the climax of history. The more we study this book, the more we realize God has a predestined plan for humanity and its empires. As we read the daily news, it is easy to see the prophet Daniel between the lines. It is also easy to see that the spotlight on Jesus is dimming by the hour. The masses feel this darkness creeping up, overpowering the world and dragging self-proclaimed Christians into irreversible despair, leaving some to cower in denouncing their faith, while others begin to search out the aged prophecies of God's holy prophets. Jesus will come to establish his global millennial kingdom. However, there will be a final horrific attempt by the Antichrist to replicate this kingdom by building one last global empire in order to gain control over the Jews. The efforts of this reprobate leader will be pridefully immovable, murderous in nature, and quick to kill anyone who stands against his madness method. Count on this. I equally love the book of Revelation. This book reveals the completion of Daniel's prophecies. I call Daniel and John the twins of prophecy. As in the case of Nimrod, which was Nebuchadnezzar's forefather, in Revelation chapter 13, the passage bluntly describes what this final and ultimate Antichrist will look like and what he will do. Jesus calls him the beast. Taking a look at that passage, it says, "There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name was not written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain." Satan, the final Antichrist, will be filled with pride and endowed with an authority that impresses all of humanity. So much so, the inhabitants of the world will fall at his feet and worship him, just as we saw with the story of Nebuchadnezzar. Welcome to number 10, the fiery furnace. The prophecy revealed regarding this beast in Revelation's book delivers him to the fiery pit of hell. The fiery furnace shown to us in Daniel's book was and is the symbol of Revelation's fiery hell. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego represent the three phases of Israel's identity. Daniel himself represents the life of Jesus Christ. Sad to say, Babylon represents the empire of Satan, which shows its ugly face during the second half of his 7-year tribulation. Nebuchadnezzar had a special, torturous weapon he made use of, the fiery furnace. While the furnace was used as a kiln to fire the bricks that built his kingdom, he had a second use, to destroy those who resisted him. He had a twisted view of watching those who did not honor and worship him to be burnt unto death. Let's take a look at our scriptures. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. He commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their other clothes, and were cast in the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace had been extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew the men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of the blazing fire, still tied up. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and stood up in haste. He said to his high officials, "Was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire?" They replied to the king, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He responded and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. While many believe that Daniel was thrown into the fiery furnace as well, the scriptures reference the 4th as a son of the gods, an angel. However, I do believe what the Babylonian history books reveal regarding Daniel's guilt to not worshiping the statue of the king. Thus, he too was indicted on the same charges. As proper, we will stick to the written word. Looking at the ugliness of the Antichrist. In the final empire, the whole world, all tribes, people, languages, and nations will be subject to the Antichrist. The irony is, this Antichrist, Satan, will rebuild the ancient city of Babylon, dedicated to himself as his capital. You can read more about that in Revelation 14, verses 8, and then again in 18 and 19. His objective is to unite the armed forces of the world in a last-ditch effort to destroy Israel, particularly the 144,000 pure bloodline Jews. That's right out of Revelation 14, verse 1. This Antichrist will also globalize the economy, requiring everyone to be marked, chipped, with a tracking modality derived from the marketing coding system of 666. This system is the base code for all scanned codes on present market products. Without this mark, not one person in the world will be able to buy, sell, or trade within global commerce. However, there will be resistors who refute this mark. Widespread death penalties will result, causing spilled blood of thousands upon thousands who figure out this leader is filled with evil intent. Keep in mind that the only believers on the earth at the time are the 144,000 pure bloodline Jews. Does Satan go after them? Yes. The chasing down of these men is the final act of the Antichrist that provokes Jesus' second coming. When the time comes when all these cowardly nations join forces with the Antichrist to come against Israel, the fiery furnace shows its ugly head one last time. However, this time God intensifies the flames by cracking open the earth and unleashing the molten lava of the earth's center. And this happens moments after the second coming of Jesus. Read about it in Revelation chapter 9, verse 2. Now let's look at breaking the laws of the king. Even though it is prophetic and needs to parallel with Revelation's book, Nebuchadnezzar allows his fame to go to his head. Now filled with pride, he orders all people, nations, languages, to bow and worship his golden image every time his trumpeter blows the horn. More horrific, anyone who refuses would be cast into the fiery furnace. Since Daniel and his 3 friends were faithful to worship the God of the Hebrew and no other gods, they became the first to be indicted, which was the plan, by the way, of the evil manipulators of the king's advisors. Their focus was not the Hebrew people as a whole. It was to remove Daniel from being the king's #1 advisor. They wanted Daniel dead. While their plan seems to be unfolding into perfect crime, God decides to use this evil plan to reveal one of the more sound doctrines of the ages. Those in Christ cannot be burned by the fiery furnace of hell. Since the king had to obey the inscribed law crafted by these evil advisors, Nebuchadnezzar was obligated to toss Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace. At this juncture of our story surfaces the question of what about Daniel? Now, either the king held Daniel in protection or was cast into the fire as well. Only God knows. Looking at I'm tied up at the moment, Nebuchadnezzar was enraged with revenge. He fired up the furnace 7 times hotter than the norm, tied and bound Daniel's friends, and ushered them to the fire by guardsmen. The fire was so intense, it fried the guardsmen before getting the men into the fire. The 3 Hebrew faithful servants fell into the furnace as soon as the guards burned. A miracle unfolds with the king standing in observance, enjoying his twisted moment. The king notes the 4th figure, with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace. It was either an angel of the living God or Jesus Christ himself. The king shouts, "Was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire?" After amazement, the king commands the 3 to come out from the fiery furnace, and immediately he proclaims, "You servants of the Most High God." In conclusion, while this experience was one of the greatest stories of faithfulness to God, it also became the revelatory moment of Nebuchadnezzar, knowing that the Hebrew God was the highest of all gods. Amazingly, the king said these words, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command and yielded up their bodies so as to not serve or worship any god except their own God." Did you know the ultimate Antichrist, Satan, will fall on his knees and confess that Jesus is God? Well, it's true. This portion of our story reveals Revelation's prophecy of this outcome. However, until Nebuchadnezzar has his second dream, he remains faithful to Daniel's God. After the second dream, hell breaks loose in and upon the king's life. Coming up next, number 11, the second dream. Nebuchadnezzar was at the top of his game, filled with power and an elevated ego. He searches for even more. Little did he realize when he had his second dream, God was about to humble him, save him from himself, and turn his selfish heart toward the Hebrew God, once and for all. His dream? God compares his life to a great and mighty tree. The tree gets cut down, and the king is converted to a beast of the field. In our next episode, we will explore the details of this bizarre dream. Thank you for joining us today. It is an honor to be able to share the Old Testament prophecies with you. Always keep in mind, we call them Old Testament prophecies, but they are alive and well today. Until next time.
I have waited for you to lead us out of Babylon. For I was just a boy when I came here. When 70 years were completed for Babylon.
Have faith, my brothers.